relevant people, may it be media or the policy makers. And a lot of people have demanded that we cannot come today because people have started, because earlier the timing was different. Now it's like most of the people are at work now. So let's see how many people can join this meeting. So we will be. So Ashwini ji, if you Vandana ji is in the travel like to home, and she suggested that you give the opening remarks and then she can use the closing remarks. Is that okay with you, right?
I think you start the meeting.
I will start the meeting and then I will invite you.
And yeah. I think let's hear from all of us.
Okay.
Dr. Sajdev is here and Vandana ji is there.
So you want to come only at the end again, right?
Yeah, in between, because let me understand the whole issue from the experts' perspective.
But in the I'll invite you because
invite you as chair.
As a chair, yeah. And then you can ask me to continue from there.
अश्विनी जी नमस्कार.
नमस्ते डॉक्टर साहब, कैसे हैं सर?
नमस्ते. हाँ जी, आपको शुरू में तो स्माइल करके लोगों से हेलो कहनी तो पड़ेगी और फिर कहना पड़ेगा चालू रखिए, मैं एंड में बोलूंगा.
In fact, thank you, Dr. Arun ji. In fact, I'm really very happy to be in the company of so many experts in the field. I'm a non-expert. I'm an activist on the whole issue, and I try to understand from you people. And but the overall concern for me is the health of the people over the profit. So today only I was just hearing something from somebody that some editorial has been written that on Swadeshi Jagan Manch is acting against the privatization and not allowing somebody to come in on the argument of national security interest. So, but I would say that for us, national security, health of the people, environment, and the employment is supreme. And on that very principle, in fact, when Dr. Gupta told me about this whole issue, so I immediately said that because I got educated from people like Arun Gupta ji, that how unhealthy is our food, and the companies keep on making profits. Nobody is questioning them, and the regulator is in the lap of these companies, and I'm not saying it. I have seen them in the lab in their programs. So and I have been questioning their role recently when without their jurisdiction on the issue. I don't know whether this comes under their jurisdiction or not, but GM food, they were allowing them to be included in our food basket without any reason, because that was, and we have been fighting against GM, and we know it for certain that FSSA has got no locus standi in that. So, but this is the irony of the situation, that our regulators are working for the corporates, and it is very unfortunate that FSSAI has entered into different kinds of arrangements with the corporates, which they should not, keeping out the conflict of interest. And on that very basis, I would say, just in the beginning, that we know for certain that extra processed food is harmful mm, for the humans, and also the fact that the excessive sugar, excessive salt, excessive uh, mm, saturated fat, all these are harmful, and therefore there has to be warning for the consumers that this is not good for your health. Rather than that, if they are trying to give them the legitimacy by way of health star, so that is unfortunate. And I would only say this much, and I would like to hear more from our experts, and then I'll come again. Thank you. Dr. Arunji, you please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll be taking a few minutes. Welcome all the participants, and Marcella has also joined. Welcome, Marcella. We all the participants and all the speakers who have kindly agreed to be part of this work. And we are very aware that it's so early in Chile and late night at Australia. And we especially thank you both for joining us to this important work and share the experience at your end. As you know, the public health crisis India is facing, I mean, most of the world is facing, actually, it's not only India, is huge in terms of rising obesities, and much of the blame goes to the unhealthy, ultra-processed foods, high in salt, sugar, and food industry is at the back end of this and interferes with aggressive marketing, interferes at the policy level, as Ashwini just now said. We welcome the work which is now Government of India is into. So we have heard recently the Niti Aayog is also working on the policy front of control of and reduction of these unhealthy foods. And so is FSSAI on the labeling, and Niti Aayog is even thinking of having a higher taxation on the. So for the people who don't know, Niti Aayog is a policy think tank of the government. So they are thinking of higher taxation on we have higher taxation on the beverages, but they are thinking of all the harmful foods to put on. So one of the key actions, which is the focus of today's meeting, is the front of pack labeling. This is under consideration at the meetings in Food Safety Authority, which few days back, because of a report commissioned by the authority, by the Institute of Management, Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad, led to a decision to adopt, to put health star rating into the draft regulation. So that's why we are together here today to discuss which kind of label actually works better for the health of the people. And that's where our esteemed panelists will be. The program will be running as, first of all, we will have Mark Lawrence from Australia will share the Australian experience. It will be followed by Professor Marcella from Chile to share the Chilean experience. Then Dr. Vandana Prasad will be presenting the policy brief, which we have recently developed to deal with this issue. It will be followed by Neha Kanpur, belonging to University of Sao Paulo now, and T.H. Chan School of Public Health. So, and further on, we have the premier consumer institutes, organizations in India, CUTS International and Consumer Voice. So they will give their comments, and we have a representative of the Center for Science and Environment, who is also been working on this issue for the last 1 decade. Most of them, 3 of them who are, they are members of the stakeholder dialogues in Food Safety Authority and have already raised their voice there. Professor Sachdev, who is a known researcher in India and epidemiologist, he will be doing the summing up. And we will have time for questions and answer. And then in the end, we will have closing remarks, both from Ashwini Mahajan and Vandana Shivaji. So this is how the program is going to run. In the middle of the program, after the 4 speakers, we will have a poll on the endorsement for the policy brief and the choice of the label. Nupur will conduct that poll. And then just to let you know that the one of the objective of this webinar is also to reach out to the policymakers. So after hearing you and framing a view, we will also reach out to the policymakers. And India, we believe India should set an example for other countries in the region as well as globally, as Chile and other Latin American countries have set in the region following the warning labels, for example. So today's webinar is about health star rating versus warning labels on the food. So that's what we are going to talk today. And that's what the deliberation will provide, I hope, will provide answers to the questions like which is better, which is effective, which one truly reflects the nutrient content of the food, which can identify the foods to be unhealthy quickly, and which one is more likely to reduce the consumption of unhealthy foods. So these are the questions to be answered during the deliberations today. And I request all the participants, if you have any questions, do write in the Q&A box here at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any comments, interacting with people here, greetings or whatever, please do that. Use chat box for that. And we will have 1 or 2 questions depending upon the time immediately after the speaker has finished her or his presentation, but we will see if the timing runs. Otherwise, we have 15 minutes at the end of this to have questions and answers. So keep writing, and to all the speakers, if you want to address a question online when you are not presenting, so that would also be very welcome, so that it saves time to ask all the questions in the end. So thank you so much once again, and may I now invite Professor Mark Lawrence from Australia. He is the professor of the University of sorry, can you switch your mics off, please? So Mark is a professor of public health and nutrition at Deacon's University and is a food science as well as a researcher in ultra processed foods, discusses science and politics of food systems. So he has a vast experience of more than 3 decades. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. Can I just check that you can see my screen and you can hear me clearly?
Absolutely fine.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So, well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, good evening. And as Dr. Gupta has said, I'm here to talk about the Australian experience of using the Health Star rating system. I just want to start by saying that I don't have any commercial interest to declare. I am involved in a number of advisory and membership roles and committees to do with healthy and sustainable food systems and dietary guidelines, but I just want to make it clear that I alone am responsible for the views expressed in this presentation. I'm not speaking on behalf of any of those committees. So, as that nice introduction, globally there is an unfortunate trend that is accelerating, and it's this proliferation of ultra-processed foods. And no region is immune from this proliferation. And certainly throughout Asia, we're seeing this rapid, as the transition economically and so on is occurring, we're seeing these food system transformations characterised by this rapid uptake in ultra-processed foods. And I've seen a number of interesting papers in the professional journals and newspapers and so on from Indian authors, and who are commenting with expert advice on these trends and on the links between these foods and adverse health outcomes, a whole range of adverse health outcomes to do with predominantly non-communicable diseases like diabetes and so on, as well as obesity and several other diseases, unfortunately. So how does this relate to the Indian dietary guidelines? And I think we have here an expert publication, which is a synthesis of some of the best science we know in this space. Now, what I think is particularly relevant to today's presentation, the two quotes that I've taken from this document. The first one here is very relevant to our topic. So it's talking about, this is in the preface to the document. It says that the shift from traditional to modern foods, changing cooking practices and increased intake of processed and ready-to-eat foods, intensive marketing of junk foods and health beverages have affected people's perception of foods as well as their dietary behaviour. So you can see we're getting into this link now with the importance of food labelling in this context. I wanted to lift then one other quote from this document, and it's right up front. It's on page 1 of the introduction. I think, again, this is a really key comment that the Indian dietary guidelines emphasise. Since people consume food, it is essential to advocate nutrition in terms of foods rather than nutrients. I want to make this a theme of these slides I'm going to present, the importance of thinking about the food and food being more than just the sum of the nutrients they contain. We need to think of the physical and the chemical structure of the overall food, not just the presence of a handful of nutrients. So against that background, and related to the webinar topic, there are a number of metrics being used around the world for assessing a food's healthiness or its health potential, if you like. But two of the main ones are nutrient profiling and food, what I would refer to as food processing profiling. I've given two of the more prominent examples of these contrasting ways of assessing a food's healthiness. So on the left-hand side there, you see the Australian example, which is the Health Star rating system, and the background to this approach states that it's the number of stars is determined using a calculator driven by an algorithm, and it's designed to assess positive and risk nutrients in food. So it's focused specifically on the nutrients. It's agnostic towards the actual food itself. It's just focusing on the on the nutrient composition. On the right-hand side, the food itself becomes more relevant to the assessment. And so this is the ultra-processed food agenda, and it is part of this classification scheme that was first coined in 2009 in Brazil, and it's known as NOVA. And NOVA assesses the healthiness of food based on their degree or the level of food processing. And foods are grouped into one of these 4 groups that you can see there. So group 1 is fresh or minimally processed foods. Group 2 are processed culinary ingredients. So it might be a bit of oil that you would add to a minimally processed food, usually in the house, or a little bit of sugar or what have you to help with the preparation of the food and the consumption. And together they make processed foods, and it's seen as being more palatable and so on. And that's fine. Where the problem from a health perspective comes to play is when we transcend from processed food to ultra-processed foods. And you can see there's sort of this line between group 3 and group 4 foods. And ultra-processed foods tend to be synthetic foods. So these are foods that bear very little resemblance to the minimally processed foods, which perhaps they originated from, but their chemical composition has been significantly changed. They've got a lot of additives and other ingredients, novel ingredients added to them. And critically, it's not just the chemical composition of these products that's changed, it's also their physical structure as a consequence of the processing itself. So whether it's high heat temperatures as part of that, or extrusion processes or whatever, it has changed the food matrix. And those two changes are associated, or the mechanisms that we believe explain the association between diets high in these foods and, as I said before, a range of adverse nutritional health outcomes. So before I get into some examples of what we've experienced in Australia, I just wanted to just summarise some of the key nutrition concepts to think about when, in today's topic, when we are thinking about the Health Star rating system versus a more warning statements-based system. So as the Indian Dietary Guidelines so eloquently put it, people eat foods, not nutrients. I want to keep coming back to that. I mean, that's how our bodies have evolved. And that's sort of just such a fundamental principle, I think, to put in place. Secondly, food is more than the sum of the nutrients it contains. As I said before, nutrients within foods can act together synergistically to affect their metabolism and so on. So to think about just foods in isolation can be nutrients in isolation can be problematic, particularly when we are trying to look at, say, half a dozen nutrients and ascribe a health value based on just that relatively small number of nutrients in a food. We need to consider the nature of the food vehicle within which the nutrients are delivered. So rather than thinking of nutrients acting in isolation of the food vehicle within which they are delivered. And finally, just on the issue of ultra-processed foods, as I said just previously, food processing concerns are not just about the chemical changes and the introduction of risk nutrients. That is important, of course, but it's also this influence of the processing on the physical structure of food that we need to be mindful of. There's a very powerful randomised control trial done a few years ago by Kevin Hall, which I think was quite groundbreaking and is now highly cited. He put two groups of people in very controlled circumstances on diets that were controlled for their nutrient composition, their energy composition, and so on. So there was no difference in terms of the classic nutrition characteristics of those two diets. The only difference was one diet was composed almost entirely of ultra-processed foods, and the other diet was consistent with nutrition recommendations. So just the physical structure of the foods differed. And over several weeks period, he fed the people were isolated and only fed these one or other of these diets. And then they crossed over and they then changed to the other types of diets. And what his study clearly showed, and very statistically significant, was that those people who were on the ultra-processed food diets gained weight significantly more than those on the other. And it was seen as a strong predictor of not just overweight, but obesity. And that was purely, it couldn't have been to do with any nutrient differences. It had to do with the physical structure of the food. So I'm now going to move on to the Australian experience with the Health Star rating system. And just to preface this by saying the decision-making that led to the Health Star rating system in Australia, and for that matter, New Zealand, was very controversial. And there were predictions about where this might head. And I think a classic example here is this product from Coca-Cola, which is a milk-based product, but it's heavily fortified with a whole range of nutrients and novel ingredients. And it tracks a 5 stars rating out of 5. So just a couple of examples of the different dimensions to what we've now observed in Australia. It's been more than 5 years of implementation. So we're questioning whether in fact the system is incentivising the use of non-nutritive sweeteners. So you see these 3 products here. One's a drink, one's a lolly or sweet, and the other is an ice lolly, ice confection. And they respectively attract 3.5, 5, and 3.5 health stars. These are all ultra-processed foods. And when you particularly look at the middle one, which has 5 stars, and it has an added claim of no sugar, its sweetness is being delivered through the use of non-nutrients. It's not just the removal of sugar that's an interesting outcome. There's questions about whether the system is incentivising the use of protein isolates to attract higher health star ratings. So we're seeing quite an increase in the retail sector of these protein drinks and even protein fortified cereals. So protein isolates being put into breakfast cereals and muesli bars and things like that. And you can see from that ingredient list there that there are these caseinates and whey protein concentrates that are being put into these foods. And the algorithm that calculates the health star rating awards positive points for these sorts of ingredients being present in food. In addition to the protein isolates, we're observing a number of products that have got added fibre extracts and powders being added to them. So here's a breakfast cereal, and if you look at the ingredient list, it has sorghum flour, maize flour, chickpea fibre, psyllium husk. All of these you wouldn't normally expect in a product of this type, and we're seeing a lot of these, and this one attracts 4 stars. Conversely, fortunately not to a great extent, but we're also seeing some strange outcomes in the other direction where a number of minimally processed foods, so we see these black and green olives here with a little bit of orange zest and coriander added to them, attracts just 1 health star, even though it is clearly a minimally processed food. Brazil nuts, I mean, these are raw, there's no salt added, they're not, no oil or anything added to them, just raw packaged Brazil nuts, attracts 4 out of 5. I'm not sure what else they could do to attract another star. It seems very strange they don't get maximum. And similarly with eggs, eggs get 4 stars. So all minimally processed foods. So the question being asked is it inadvertently the health star rating system promoting this idea of health halos? So this is where unintentionally some of these ultra processed foods are being able to be promoted with relatively high health star ratings. And an excellent PhD student at Deakin University, Sarah Dickey, is doing her PhD on this work, and she's done some very comprehensive monitoring of all new food products that have entered the marketplace since the advent of the health star rating system. And her profiling of all these products has shown that nearly 3/4 of the products entering the marketplace that were ultra-processed foods are now displaying health star ratings of 2.5 or more stars. And so you have to start thinking, that the system really seems to be creating these health halos for these products. Also out of Australia, there are some influential studies being done. And this one study, I mention this one because it does refer to India. It claimed, this is in the journal Obesity Reviews back in 2019. It was a comparison of the health. It was making a claim that the health star rating system could be used globally as a way of benchmarking different countries' food supplies against each other. And they claimed that the health star rating system was well suited to a comparative analysis of packaged foods and beverages available in different countries. I do understand that it's being used a lot for advocacy, for promoting their work in the health star rating in many countries around the world. And a number of us wrote a letter to the editor very concerned about this because the study had virtually no critical nutrition science analysis behind it. Products from India, for example, were represented just 2.1% of the foods that were analysed. So it was a pretty heroic extrapolation to start saying how India was performing on just such a small sample size. And when countries like India were compared with other countries, there was an absence of statistical tests to come up with some of these conclusions, and no information was presented on the representativeness of the data that had been collected. So some observations, moving quickly along, about the, Dr. Gupta asked me to just make some observations about the IIM report. I think just to make the comment what the report did, it asked the following research questions, and it used a very rigorous study design, a randomised controlled trial. And so it looked at which front of pack labelling system from among 5 or 6 from memory, I think it was 5, is simple, easy to recognise and to understand, and which front of pack labelling system has a greater impact on customer behaviour in terms of purchase intention. These are important questions, of course, but critically, what the report did not do, and I'm assuming which was not asked to do, so I'm not casting dispersions on the authors by any means, but it did not consider the validity and the limitations of the nutrition science and concepts that underpin any of those front of pack labelling systems that it examined. It looked at consumers' responses to them, but it appears that it was taken as a given that the nutrition science was fine. And I think it matters to ask, is this sufficient for making a decision about these front of pack labelling systems? Although knowing consumers' responses to different front of pack labelling formats is helpful, of course, we want to make sure that the one we choose is understood and so on by consumers. But knowing whether the nutrition science and the concepts which underpin that front of pack labelling system are valid is the priority consideration. We must get that in place first for front of pack labelling decision making before we start asking, do consumers understand them? If the nutrition science and the concepts are flawed, then consumer responses are virtually irrelevant to decision making, as there are risks that the front of pack labelling could be ineffective and promote unintended consequences affecting the safety and effectiveness of the scheme. So in conclusion, nutrition science has a history of well-intended policy activities, but ineffective and unintended consequences. This is going back, to the early days of nutrition. Currently, the Australian Health Star rating system, our experience of it, is that it is inadvertently creating a health halo for ultra-processed foods. Nutrition science is complex, and fit-for-purpose activities are most likely to be effective and safe. And many of us believe that this means warning-based systems. I'm just going to finish on naming 3 that are worth considering. There's a hybrid model being created by that PhD student I mentioned, Sarah Dickey, which is in preparation now. We're hoping to submit it later this year. And it combines the NOVA system with a little bit of nutrient profiling. There is some excellent work done in France by Anthony Fardet and Eric Rock, where they have this 2-step process. They call it a vertical hierarchy decision tree, where they look at the level of processing as the first point in the decision tree. And then once that's in place and assess whether a food's ultra-processed or not, then they look at its nutrient profile. And of course, the Hsr and Warning system, I think, is a global benchmark for us all. And there's no need for me to say any more about that because our next speaker is an expert in that area. So I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Mark. And I don't have any ready question in the. Is there anyone, one question of any of the participants wanted to directly ask a question to Mark? Please raise your hand if you have a question.
There's one question from Rekha Harish.
Mm-hmm.
It says, what are the criteria to quantify the magnitude of negative or positive nutrients to give an algebraic sum to rate any food product?
Okay. Mark, do you take this?
Yes, sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure. What are the criteria to quantify the magnitude of negative or positive nutrients to give an algebraic sum to rate any food product?
Thank you. Yes, this is part of the algorithm. So there is a calculation built into the algorithm where a certain number of points are awarded depending on how either the so-called positive nutrients or the negative nutrients, for that matter, perform against a certain cutoff, a preset cutoff. So that's standard across the different foods.
All right. Let me now move on to our next guest speaker from Chile. Sorry.
Can you, this Bill Jeffrey has commented earlier on the flaws of the, I mean that you said that nutrients, but fruits and vegetables are also being considered, is one comment he has made in your Australia Health Star rating system. And the second comment, if you could address that the Hall study did not consider fruit and vegetable content contrary to the Australian algorithm or most independent dietary guidance in characterizing ultra-processed foods. Would you like to comment on the latter one and the first one? I think it's important.
So if I'm right, the question was the Hall study did not take into account fruit and vegetable composition. Is that the question, Hashi?
The Hall study did not consider the fruit and vegetable content contrary to the Australian algorithm or most independent dietary guidance in characterizing ultra-processed from food. That's what Bill Jeffrey has written.
Yeah. So the basis for Hall's study was that the macronutrients were controlled across both diet studies. So for all other food groups, yes, they were controlled, but yeah, the fruit and vegetable categories might have been different. But the point he was trying to make was that the nutrition composition across the both was comparable at least, in terms of the protein, fat, carbohydrate, and micronutrients, and energy.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. Okay. We have to move now. I will respond to Maitri on the question whether anybody was involved from the industry to develop it. So Mark, I will respond to her later. Okay. We need to move now to our next speaker. We have Vidas Marshall Reis. She is a medical doctor and a master's in and doctorate in nutrition and food from University of Chile. Currently works as an assistant professor at the Institute of Nutrition and Food Technology at the University of Chile. And she is a co-researcher in the longitudinal studies associated with the evaluation of the Chilean law. Over to you, Marshall.
Thanks. I'll share my screen. So can you see my screen?
Fine, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So thank you for inviting me to this webinar to show you the Chilean experience on warning labels. I have no conflict of interest to report, and the work I will show has been funded by the Canadian International Development Research Center, the National Agency for Research, and Bloomberg Philanthropies from US. Just a little bit of context. In Chile, overweight and obesity is really high. More than 70% of adults and over 50% of very young children. And the National Dietary Survey of 2010 has reported that about 30% of our energy comes from ultra-processed food. And this is despite a lot of effort done during the 90s and 2000s, since we start understanding that obesity was high and underweight was over. We have, or the government has implemented different activities or campaigns, educational campaigns, trying to let people know what is healthy, what is unhealthy. So going to the individual decision-making process. So like strengthening the muscle of this individual that needs to push this big stone that is eating healthy. So there was a new understanding on how to deal with this that could be, besides strengthening the muscle of the individual, trying to get down this slope and trying to make healthier decisions easier. So in this idea, the law of labeling was implemented, or firstly discussed in the parliament and then agreed and implemented. And the law said that sodium, saturated fats, energy, and total sugars were the main drivers of obesity and non-communicable diseases. And then it stated three pillars. The most popular one, and the one that I will talk today, is the warning labels. So foods that were high in this energy or nutrients would need to be labeled accordingly. That's what the law said. And moreover, these foods cannot be sold at schools or nursery, nor being part of the food feeding program, and cannot be promoted to children either in internet, TV, packages, etc. So this has a lot of details because we have a law and then a regulation, the act, and all these details are available in this publication for people that is more interested on that. Briefly, at the point that the implementation was discussed here, it was in 2015, and we didn't have available 2014, sorry, the PAHO system was not available for detecting which food was high in. So we needed to develop a new system, and we have in mind this idea of ultra processing, but we couldn't really implement it because of our regulation, like just saying ultra process. So the way to arrive to that was that this regulation would be focused on foods that were added with ingredients that add their natural content of sugars, saturated fats, or sodium because of these ingredients that were added during the processing. So for instance, an almond wouldn't be, we didn't need to check on their saturated fats unless it has been added with sugars or butter or something else. And the limits that were stated for assigning this idea of high in were this limit here. So a caloric density per 100 gram, or sodium density, total sugar density, everything for 100 grams for solid food, or 100 ml for liquids. And the implementation was staggered. So the act or the regulation was implemented in 2016 with more flexible limits, and 3 years later, the final limits were achieved. So again, it is important to say that the law, for us, the law published in 2012, was stating that prepackaged foods and beverage high in energy or key nutrients must have a front of package warning label that inform the consumer of this condition. So when the regulation with the details on how to label these foods need to be developed, we were already fixed in this idea of warning label. And the warning labels we arrived to the idea of warning labels during the parliament discussion of the law that took 5 years, because the first draft said, it talked about a traffic light. It was in 2007, just when the UK has started their traffic light labeling. But then some preliminary studies show here that there was not a complete understanding when a food had a green light and a red light, what should I do with this food? And then they decide to keep like the idea of the red light, that was the warning label. So the warning label for foods was a complete new paradigm when we were discussing the regulation. There was no other country that has implemented like that. And therefore we need to do different studies in order to understand which was the better label. And we tried different colors, mixture, or different kind of shapes, different amount of information that we provide, or some signs that were more joyful, or some other that were more strong, etc. And we get this idea of the stop sign, black and white, with saying high in sugar and saying the mean or calories, or etc., and stating that the Ministry of Health was the one saying this. And the idea of simple warning label is that the consumer doesn't know that doesn't need to decide or make an algorithm or a decision making or how to interpret these signs. It's very straightforward. You clearly understand that you are advised to not choosing this food. You can decide to go through this advice or not, but you don't need to calculate or average these green and red lights, etc. And this is based in the idea that all our or most of our decision-making process applies heuristic techniques. So whenever we can do a shortcut with the decision-making process, we will do it. Even if we think we make rational decisions, this is not the case when you, in most decisions, and mostly when you do decisions in a daily basis and very like several times in a day as a food choice or intake. And also with the idea that we have several reasons for eating. We have researchers have detected that we have a whole reward system insisting us to keep eating, and we have all these marketing and strategies that tell us to keep eating. So we don't need more ideas to keep eating, like a healthy choice or endorsement label. We need some signs to stop eating. The other ones we have plenty. And very briefly, this idea, the first draft, came from an alliance of researchers, policymakers, and civil society. And then the health authority took the lead on the discussion process during the parliament, this 5 years discussion that I told you. Then the law was published very generally. So we need 2 more years of discussion for developing the act with all the details, like defining what is high in, defining which will be the label, etc. And this setting the rules was done led by the Ministry of Health, but in tables with experts from scholars, like a researcher, health professional organization, and civil society. Food industry was not sit here in the decision making or the rules. When the rules were fixed, the food industry was not there. Then it took 1 more year of internal discussion between the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Finance. And then at the final step, there was a public consultation where everyone, food industry also, could said, okay, I don't agree with this, why you shouldn't consider this and that. And that's why, for instance, this staggered implementation was fixed or agreed. So very briefly on the evaluation, we understand we have food environment regulation, so we check on potential impacts on food environment level, behavior level, and outcome level. And I will show just results from the first phase implementation. So the implementation was in June 2016. So 6 to 8 months later, more than 95% of products that were high in were correctly labeled. So about from prepackaged food, about 40% had at least one label. About half of them has just one label, and then 2 labels, 3 labels, and we had even foods with 4 labels that were really with these flexible limits. It was like really high in sugar and high in calories, and actually they were mostly foods imported from the United States. The most frequent label was high in calories. The less frequent label was high in sodium. And even before the implementation and before the communicational campaigns, our data checking on an example of adolescents and preschooler mothers that we have here in Santiago, when we ask, when we show for the first time the labels and ask them to what they understand of the label, more than 80% of adolescents and more than 80% of women understood very quickly, without any explanation, that the food with a warning label is less healthy than the food with labels. And most of, like 90% of adolescents and almost all mothers said that they would like the Ministry of Health tells them what is a less healthy food, because there is this idea that the nanny state, we don't want the state to tell us what to do, but here the people wanted to be advised on how to do a food selection. Some qualitative studies has shown us that mothers of preschooler and adolescent has said that they are changing their food purchase behavior, and even the social norms mostly triggered by young children, because children would not allow them, their young children won't allow them to buy something with 2 or 3 labels, because the labels are so easy, even a preschooler children can detect it. And here is like, no ma'am, no way I'm eating this food, it has 2 labels, my friend at school will laugh at me. So it's a very interesting situation there. But more concretely, we have been evaluated through the Kantar World Panel in more than 2,000 households, the purchase behavior of families from several socioeconomic backgrounds and different places in Chile. And we have seen that after the regulation, the beverages that has at least one label that is mostly high in sugar, families have decreased in 24% the purchases of this kind of beverages. And when we go to solid and liquid food, the high in foods, high in saturated fats has decreased in 16%. The sodium content, high in sodium foods have decreased in 37%. The high in calories foods have decreased in 24%, and high in sugar foods in 26%. Because some high in foods has increased, the overall change is not that big, but it's important to show how actually this is not self-report, this is actually measured, and the food purchase behavior have changed after the law implementation. And also importantly, the food industry has decreased the amount mostly from sodium and sugar in some foods. So for instance, based on the pre-implementation information of the nutrient fact panel, we expected that, for instance, in breakfast cereals, that 80% were high in calories. But just 60% of them was high in calories after the implementation. And that this was because they decreased their sugar content. Also, we expected 46% of items being high in sugar, but just 24% was high in sugar. And this is, here I show a shape of the distribution of sugars. In green, we can see the post-implementation period, and you can see like a left shift of the sugar content just below the limit, the cutoff of sugars, indicating that they decrease the amount of sugar in order to be not to be high in sugar. So this happened for breakfast cereal, but also for milks. Importantly, more than 90% of decrease of what was expected to be high in sugars, also for beverage, and for sodium in the case of cheese and sausages. And the last data to show is that when we compare food industry that have the majority of their portfolio with high in foods versus less processed food industry, there is no difference in terms of job losses or wages or salaries decrease. So our final thoughts is warning labels were implemented as stated in the law and act, because of course food industry was very against of this, but finally they implemented it. The labels are well recognized, understood, and valued by the population. They modulate purchase behavior. Food industry have reformulated their products, and there was no burden in job or wages, because here they said that the economy will fall apart and everything. That didn't happen. But of course, we have plenty of future challenges. For instance, the idea that a food with less sugar but with non-caloric sweeteners, for instance, is still an ultra-processed food. So how we deal now with different ways to shift from ultra-processed to less processed foods diet, and the COVID situation, and very several challenges, of course. And just to close, we were the first ones, but now Peru, Uruguay, and Mexico has the same kind of label. Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia has agreed or approved, but are about to implement this regulation. And also Israel has this idea of warning labels, even if they are not the same shape. And this is a joint work with several other institutions, the university, the North Carolina University, and people, colleagues from Mexico and others from Chile. So thank you very much.
Very much, Marcela, was a wonderful presentation, and I love the last slides in terms of that it made no impact on the employment. So that's something usually put up by the industry, that industry will close, people will lose jobs, and certainly love the presentation on the evaluation in terms of how Chile has set an example. It's a really a wonderful work that Chile has set an example, and why every country should not copy. And the last slide, which shows the 7 countries have already done so. I hope more and more countries will pick up this model till we solve the puzzle of the ultra processed food, which Mark has also proposed a couple of things, that how do we actually make the NOVA classification as a party to the weightage process in the ultra processed food, the weightage into the label, and whichever label it is. And if I can now move on to the next, I think we will take the questions in the end if there are any. And there was a question I think Mark has already answered in the question answer box. Marcia, if you want to add on to that mentioned to you, Marcela, sorry. So I may now invite Dr. Vandana Prasad, and she will be presenting the policy brief of today, which you can see here, if you can. Okay.
Yes, we can see it, sir.
All right. So this is the policy brief. Dr. Vandana Prasad, who is a community pediatrician and a public health professional, and has been engaged in the social sector for more than 25 years. She has served the government also as a member of the National Commission for Child Rights at one point of time. She has deep interest in the issues of nutrition, malnutrition in particular, and health system strengthening, as well as child rights. So over to Vandana for presenting the policy brief authored by you, and few of us did contribute in the nutrition advocacy in public interest, the NAPI Alliance. Over to you, Vandana.
Thank you so very much, and such fabulous presentations from Australia and Chile. We are absolutely envious of the Chile experience, all of us who've been engaged with the struggle for some time. So I'm just going to share my screen. My job is really to present this policy brief, which is a consolidated document of practically everything you've been hearing since the beginning of the webinar. And it's intended to be a succinct document that places sort of as linearly and simply as possible the logic of what we're asking for, and the reasons why we're asking for that, in a way in which lay consumers, lay public, as well as lay policymakers would be encouraged to kind of take the stance that we're trying to position. So I'm just going to share my screen in a minute. Yeah. Now, as I start, I just want to also say that as Arunji mentioned, I worked the first draft of this policy brief along with the BPNI Secretariat. Nupur contributed massively in support. And there were 5 experts who were closely involved, which is many of them are sitting here. So HBS Sachdeva was one of them, Piyush Gupta, doctors, Dr. Umesh Kapil, and Dr. Praveen Kumar, as well as Dr. Arun Gupta himself. This was then reviewed by 7 other experts, and it was circulated to 110 interested experts across the globe before we finally arrived at this. I can see from the preceding presentations that we do have a few updates to make, and also this IM study that is being referred to came up really after the major work on this policy brief had been done, though we did try to incorporate findings from that or issues that arose from that. So just moving ahead quickly, and I will not repeat things that have been said, but really essentially take you through the structure of this policy brief. So the first part of the policy brief just lays out the public health problem. I think it's very important to understand that we are going at this issue from just immediately from the point of view of the public health crisis that really we think that India is at the threshold of, and also at a very important juncture where we are still in a phase where we can prevent a lot of the burden of disease from NCDs and obesity that the rest of the world or large portions of the world have already crept into. So we try to establish quite simply, I don't think there's any controversy about this, that India is seeing very, very sharp rises in obesity in terms of the rate of increase, even though the sum total numbers may not be very large at this point of time, but enormous rate of increase in obesity and NCDs. HPS and others have been writing about the crisis that really we are fully into. And that the attribution of ultra-processed foods and so on, and foods high in salt, sugar, and fats, of that is well understood, so really doesn't need to be belabored. But it's important to understand that India is being seen as this enormous naive market by the big food industry, because we have a large population that is not schooled, semi-literate, doesn't understand nutrition, does not read and write, does not have access to the kind of information that other parts of the world do. And the penetration of what we are calling junk foods is enormously high in our rural areas, in the deepest tribal areas, and so on. In all our experience, most of us are associated with groundwork. And it's very clear to us that this huge market is very attractive to the big food industry that is being pushed out from many other countries. And then we go into a scientific kind of evidence-based rationale of why we're arguing, and we're arguing very specifically in this policy brief for warning as the front of pack labels for unhealthy foods. So we're making a very, very clear recommendation at the end of this policy brief. So in terms of the consumption of ultra-processed foods in India, we have used some reports that we already had to show this increase in the market, and you can see that it's just going up manifold. And in fact, there's current evidence to say it's far higher than what was predicted in this particular Euromonitor report as well. So, something like consumption of 20 liters per capita of soft drinks in the country already. And you're talking about a country where the middle class occupies just the tiniest fraction. So you can see that, this can expand by the hundreds in no time at all, unless we take heed. Then we explain, again, because most people who will be reading this policy brief, we hope, would be people who have not heard of FOPL at all. I mean, I hadn't when I embarked upon this entire issue about a decade ago. So that it is a simple, inexpensive, practical, effective tool, and it arises from essentially, a focus on behavior change communication, placing responsibility upon the consumer. That itself, is controversial. I think that many of us feel that policymakers, laws, as Chile has demonstrated, play a very important role, and it's not something to be left voluntarily to companies, and it's not to be left entirely as the responsibility of consumers, many of whom are not in a position to take good decisions. Decisions in our country are not only about information, they're also about access to decent quality food, and that's another argument and story altogether. The aim, again and again, is to reduce overweight and obesity, and consequently NCDs. And we hearken to the WHO framework for all of this, the WHO standards, and so on and so forth. So why it's needed? I mean, this is some of it. Some of the policy brief arises from the arguments that we have been facing as advocates, and the arguments that industry continuously places forward. And therefore, though much of this seems, very self-evident to the people sitting around in this meeting, but it's still there. These are still things that need to be said upfront. So one of the arguments that is brought up is that, there's already labeling, and if you really want to see what food you're eating, you just need to go to the back of the pack and look at the labels. But it's very obvious that consumers have neither the time nor the skills to really interpret these labels. And again, there's so much evidence about this that it really doesn't need to be said, except that we are still needing to say it. And so again, we just push for the fact that it's a public health intervention. Therefore, we need to make it easier, and we need to make sure that that it works. The strategy has been used across the world, and now we need to update this, Nupur, that we already have many other countries who were in the process of enforcing warning labels, but already have done so. So we'll update our policy brief to reflect that also. Now, what has been happening in India? It's unusual for a policy brief to carry, the process of how things have evolved in India, but because politics is so important to this whole business, as Australia hinted, as Chile demonstrates that where there's a political will, it can come to pass despite the arguments against it by industry and the struggle by the industry. And in their phasic manner, they have actually made it happen. However, in India, we have been struggling for so very long. So the first recommendation for FOPL was in 2014. And then many processes have happened. There have been many committees have sat, many different kinds of studies have been engaged in, and many of those studies have suffered from enormous deficiencies and limitations, as was pointed out about this IIM study. So there's no study that really goes at it with the intention to show how something will work from a public health point of view with the goal to reduce consumption. So one study will look at consumer behavior, one study will look at what the extant in the country, what categories they would fall into. So these are the two main studies, and you will note that neither really goes at it from the point of view what will work to bring down consumption from a public health point of view. So these were the two studies that we have. The IIM study is the most recent, but the other study, which is commissioned by the FSSAI, it really basically looked at, as I said, food products that exist in India, that are being used in India, and tried to categorize them to see how many of them would fail by the criteria that we were setting, or the standards that we were setting, and at that time, talking in terms of WHO cutoff. So 62.8% products failed on 3 or more nutrients. Now, I mean, so it's a matter of huge concern that, already, of course, there was an urban bias to this study, but already a huge proportion of products that people are consuming regularly are failing, and surely that should be a matter of concern. But this study went on to recommend, therefore, it's so paradoxical, therefore, that there should be a dilution of standards. Because so many products are failing, there should be a dilution of standards. I mean, completely opposed to the public health goal. I mean, it was really what kind of thing industry would perhaps not rile at as much. What kind of thing would disturb the market the least. So that seemed to be the intent of the study. So the intention of all these studies, as I've been saying, has been very problematic. Now, then the policy brief discusses the different types of FOPLs in use and what their key differences are, again, to try and arrive at a logical rationale in favor of warning labels. And so I'm not going to go into these because the next presentation is going to compare the health star rating with the nutrition warning systems, because as we know, currently what is being favored, let me just go to this next slide, is the health star rating. It seems from the IIM study that this is the one that's going to come forth in India, and with diluted WHO thresholds for salt and sugar, presumably to accommodate more products, which has been, from those early studies onwards, which has been the kind of one of the principles that FSSAI seems to be more interested in. So yes, we have taken one of these from one of our experts today on the panel is from CSE, and they have been doing a huge amount of advocacy. We've used all your materials. Thank you very much. Of course, with credit to you. So this gives the basic differences between HSR and warning labels. And essentially what we are trying to say strongly is that it's only the warning labels that tell you exactly which nutrient is high. It's only the warning label that does not get diluted by the addition of so-called, in our country, that's been another thing, positive nutrients. So that, an example that was given by an expert was that if you're eating a chocolate, which is a fruit and nut chocolate, because it's got fruit and nuts, got positive nutrients, it should be given some leeway. And actually in an HSR, it may well get away with, as we saw from the Australian presentation, many stars. I mean, 3 to 4 stars get away with. So, so this is the whole point, that if a diabetic is not able to say, what is the problem in the rating, whether it's sugar or salt or fat or combination of all of those, then what's the point of that? If a hypertensive is not able to say that, what's the point of that? And on the whole, really, I think it's a consumer right for them to know what nutrient is problematic and not have that diluted in terms of addition of positive nutrients. So, and why not dilute WHO thresholds? Because again and again, industry fights back, pushes back in various ways to say that's going to cause a big problem, it's going to cause, losses, it's going to cause loss of jobs. And, Chile has demonstrated that it doesn't do so. That FOPLs are merely providing information. They're not banning any products. So the industry can continue to, create those products if it needs to, or then allow, as industry should believe in, market principles to guide what products should be, brought into the market. So it's not forcing the consumer to make a choice. And basically it's coming from very strong, required and urgent public health considerations. And that WHO thresholds have been created by technical experts using relevant and reliable scientific evidence and data which relates to public health. So there's absolutely no rationale for lowering the threshold. And what's wrong with providing information on positive nutrients? That if dangerously unhealthy food creates some healthy, has some healthy food incorporated in it, well, that doesn't change the nature of unhealthiness. And giving a star, in any case, provides a positive connotation. So even if it's a half star, that health halo effect, that's a problem for us. And if you really want to find positive nutrients in something, you can look at the back of the pack. Please do so. And that basically, these are merely tactics to derail the purpose of FOPL. So this has been the argument in the policy brief. Are there economic implications of using FOPL warnings? Again, we use the evidence that we have, and we can possibly strengthen that, Nupur, again, that it has not done so. It has not impacted producers very adversely. It has not led to loss of jobs. It tends to push companies to produce healthier foods and beverages. And if some changes of labeling are required across countries, this is the other argument that industry brings in, that it's going to be very complicated because across borders for exports and imports, it might create some difficulty. But we understand that companies are used to these kinds of difficulties because there are many other rules and regulations that are different, taxation, for instance, and they incorporate that in their labels. So there's no need for them to worry about this. They can surely incorporate some good health practices also for their exports. So the recommendations are very clear. we are saying unequivocally that FOPL nutrition warning system should be a mandatory part of a comprehensive plan to reduce overall consumption of UPFs, foods high in salt, sugar, fat. But we do need other strategies. We do need, for example, we think that soda should be taxed the same way as Mexico and others have done, and many other things need to be done to improve the diets in our country. We recommend strongly that WHO thresholds for FOPL should not be diluted at all. That FOPL should be free from any mention of positive nutrients. In fact, even in a star, I mean, like, we are not advocating for stars at all, but there should be a 0 star if there is any, crossing of a threshold for an unhealthy, what is considered a problematic nutrient. And then we should use images because, as we said, in our country, illiteracy is high. So we should use images rather than numbers. Numbers will not be interpreted correctly. And this should be applied immediately to new food products, as well as or stickers be used on products that are already on the shelves to prevent any delays in this. So that's really what this policy brief is all about. And thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Vanna, for your taking time to present what we have been working on last few months. And the results are very encouraging in terms of the global experience plus the investigation done in India and whatever we have, whatever is available. Based on that, the recommendations which have come out of such a large consultation are meaningful for India, surely. And thanks a lot once again. And those people who want the hard copy of the policy brief, send us an email at DPNI with your address. We will be happy to take on the cost of mailing also. But of course, soft copy is available. And after the next session, I think Upur will also ask you for a favor if you would like to endorse it, so that we can reach out to policymakers that these are the people who do endorse the policy. Okay. Now I move to the next speaker, Neha. Neha Kanpur. Dr. Neha Kanpur is a faculty in the University of Sao Paulo, and she is the recipient of a grant that aims to assess the impact of FOPL nutrition labeling on public health in Brazil. So her work has been mainly in this area, and she is very deeply interested in the environment of the the whole environment the food is creating, and on the impacting the choices of the people. So she is certainly wanting to improve the environment as well. So please go ahead, Neha. You have 10 minutes to differentiate, present us the differences between the two labels, warning versus HSR. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, fine.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to do now is just quickly share my screen. Do you see my slides?
Yes.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone, for putting together this fantastic panel. It is such a joy and privilege, really, to be able to share this space with with colleagues and collaborators, and we continue to learn from your work. And today's presentation is really, really short, and I think builds on some of the key elements that we've heard over the course of this panel. So I'm not going to be talking very much about different studies that have been done, but instead really highlight key elements of the warning label policies or warning labels themselves versus the health star rating labels and their policy. Several of these points, not all of them, came up in previous conversations. So hopefully this is a good way to sort of highlight some of these key perspectives and give us a time to think about them. So the first thing that I would want to start with is really highlighting some of the advantages that the warning label has over the health star rating in terms of the use of color, in the terms of use of shape, and in terms of use of the alerting text. So let's start with the use of color. All warning labels in most of the countries, except for Israel, have used black and white contrasting colors. And this has been shown through several types of research to both stand out against the very colorful background of packaged products. So really, be visually eye-catching to consumers, but also the black and white contrast conveys a lower perceived healthfulness of these products. So consumer studies have shown that when consumers see black warning labels versus red warning labels or green warning labels, they perceive the product that carries the black warning label to be less healthy than the product that carries a red warning label. So these are some elements of the design that I think are important to highlight and be cognizant of as India is thinking about designing its own warning labels. The health star rating, as you had seen from some of the previous presentations and slides, some of the time does use black and white contrasting colors, but also uses the same colors as the packages that it's on. So it blends in some cases and is not visually eye-catching, and therefore can easily be missed if you're not looking for it. So that's something to be cognizant about when we're advocating for front of package labels. We want to consider these nuances. I think they go a long way in strengthening the label. Again, going back to the shape, there was some discussion about the use of stars and how that may have positive connotations. It really does, and I'm thinking about it from the Indian perspective more so perhaps. I think the idea or the thinking when this was initially being considered in Australia, and Professor Lawrence could speak to this more, was that the stars were also reflective of the energy systems on appliances that is familiar to people in the Australian context. It's probably not so for the Indian context, and can be thought of as a positive attribute, perhaps, of the product. Instead, when we think of octagons or triangles, there's a certain connotation of, it's stop signs on traffic, road signs, which, goes back to this, intuitive informative shape of it, alerting you to something, that there's something up ahead, pause for a second. And so that's something to consider as well when we think about the differences between warning labels and the HSR. The HSR, as do some warning labels, does have the circle. So it, which is considered an alerting symbol in certain contexts, but is thought to be less and shown to be less powerful, impactful in changing people's perceptions than these other two warning shapes. The warning labels also have an alerting text in there. This is an example from the Chilean context, a warning label from the Chilean context that Marcela spoke so wonderfully about. It says very clearly, this product is high in certain nutrients, as opposed to, again, the health star rating, which again, either is solely presented as stars or as, numbers, numeric text. And we have sufficient evidence to suggest that numbers, again, don't work for a lot of people, and especially in the Indian context, where, we've heard before, there's a variation in education attainment levels. And so this perhaps, again, is something to be cognizant about when we're advocating for what would be the best warning label for the Indian context. Moving on, the warning label design itself has evolved since the Chilean experience, and we've learned tremendously from what was originally developed there. The warning labels now have been thought, they're a lot more versatile. So in studies that are conducted in Ethiopia, that are being considered in Cameroon, warning labels are incorporating additional design elements like a call-out box at the end of it, reinforcing the message. So here it says, avoid consuming excess of these nutrients. So not only does it tell you via text that there's an excess of a particular nutrient, it also then interprets that for you and says, avoid products that have this. So it's sort of like a double reinforcement. And this example that you see on the screen in front of you is from Peru. There have been some proposed warning label models, from this one from South Africa, that have an additional label on the side. They call this the handle bar, where you could, again, direct text differently, but reinforce the same message. You can't see this here, I'm afraid, because, okay, here you go. Additionally, we had our speakers talk about this as well. Warning labels can incorporate endorsement from various government bodies, like they do here in Chile and Mexico, the placement of which can vary. Again, these have shown to be, to add credibility to the labels themselves in different contexts, and something that perhaps India could think about. This is another dimension that warning labels can incorporate, which is the use of icons. Instead of just having text and additional text, perhaps. This is a Colombian example, and this is the Israeli example of icons that they've incorporated within the warning label to reiterate, again, what nutrient is in excess. So this is for sugar, salt, and saturated fat. And these icons are being considered in Cameroon, in Ethiopia, where, again, there's a wide variety of educational attainments, and they speak to the entire range, all subgroups of the population, and they've shown to be widely accepted. So this might be something, again, to consider in the Indian context. Is, the health star rating incorporates none of these additional elements. Sorry. So other dimensions of the design of the warning label to consider is the ability to sort of stack them, horizontally, stack them one under the other. That's just a more efficient way of taking up space on the package and drawing attention to these nutrients of public health importance. Again, you may not be able to see this. Sorry about the placement, but additionally, this is an example of a warning label being considered for the Cameroonian context, which incorporates 2 languages. So that might be another aspect of the design of warning labels to think about. So it for the Indian context, where you have the shape, the icon, but also text in 2 languages at least. So again, just to put all of this together, the warning labels have evolved, and our ideas of how we could, develop them to really cater to the context are varying. Some of these examples that I have shown here reflect their versatility. They're also great for visual reinforcement. You could have 1 warning label, you could have 2, you could have 3. All of them communicate the same message, alerting the consumer to the presence of 1 or more nutrients of concern. We've seen from previous presentations as well that they have been very well understood, not just by people with high education who can read, but really adolescents, children. They're just intuitive in a way that the Health Star rating is not. So that was something that I wanted to again highlight through this conversation and this presentation. We've heard this before, but warning labels are really consistent, internally consistent, and clear in the information that they're trying to communicate. They only are present on products that have nutrients of concern. Every warning label reiterates the same information, that this is high in. They only target non-core, ultra-processed products, or products that have been defined to be high in fats, sodium, and sugars. So, there's a clear demarcation in the hierarchy of the foods that we eat, what foods are of concern and therefore need additional health promotion tools and warning labels on them, and what part of our diet and our dietary patterns does not. Again, we've heard from previous presentations that the Health Star rating does not differentiate between products, that nuts and trail mixes will get Health Star ratings just as much as chocolate bars, when there's clearly, in the hierarchy of healthiness or helpfulness, there's a difference there. So the warning label is able to better capture that difference, reinforce that difference in a way that the Health Star rating is unable to do. And a lot of this, again, goes back to the algorithms that we were speaking about during previous conversations. For the warning label, there has been a very clear nutrient profile model or thresholds for these nutrients of concern. And we've seen from Marcella's presentation how these could, the adaptation and the incorporation of these nutrient profile models could be staggered to further incentivize reformulation by the food industry. So, we have very clear messages here that these are nutrients of concern. These are of concern in a particular subset of products that are being consumed in the context. We'd like for them to meet or have less than these thresholds up until this time. Then we get a little bit more stringent and a more stringent still. On the other hand, the Health Star rating has a very complex algorithm, reiterating again that the algorithm does not differentiate between the type of product and actually awards points for fruit and vegetable content within a packaged product. We've seen examples of how that could be very, very misleading for the presence of protein. Again, how that leads to being manipulated by the food industry, how that leads to being misunderstood by the consumer, and how there's likely to be more unintended consequences of, using a system that's based on something that sort of considers both positive and negative nutrients as they define it. almost equally within that algorithm.
Can you wind up?
Yes,
quickly?
and that's it. I just wanted to also focus on the fact that warning labels were mandatory, while the health star rating is not, and that is a big, a really important point to consider as well. If every package that is eligible for these products, for these labels, carries those labels, it's sending a clear, consistent message to the consumer, as opposed to, you know, some products that choose to be part of the health star rating system versus others that don't. And again, as Marcella's presentation had clearly mentioned, warning labels can be used to reinforce other policies like marketing restrictions on packaged food products. Packages that carry warning labels are not to have these in a very systematic way, more so than the health star rating. So really, that was my last slide, just to sum up that we have plenty evidence now to suggest that warning labels are the strongest nutrient-based front of package label. They have clear design advantages that could be leveraged for the Indian context. They're clear and consistent in the information that they communicate about the nutrient levels, and they could be used to inform other policies in the context of mandatory implementation with a strong nutrient threshold accompanying it, and an exclusive eligibility criteria for the products that ought to display these labels. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Neha, for enlightening us with the evidence-based approach, as well as I think the point that you made, the time advantage of the warning labels, and also its adaptations in different countries, which probably India could also think of. But warning, to keep it in the warning label category rather than getting into HSR, and to keep it mandatory, I think that point is very well taken. And we will take forward these arguments in our work towards reaching out to the policymakers. Now I invite Nupo to take on the poll quickly.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Before we run the poll, we have two questions for the bill. I would like to share two slides with you. I hope my slides are visible.
No, for only a black. Yes, now it is. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So we have already heard from the experts the comparison of Neha very well articulated the comparison of HSR versus warning label, and this is just to reiterate what she mentioned. I mean, for common people to understand that what is the major difference between health star rating and warning labels. So in health star rating, we've seen that it's confusing. You know, there are too many numbers, difficult to understand, and it does not alert the consumer. Whereas the warning label is easy to interpret, it's consistent, it's clear, it's easily understandable, and it alerts the consumer to specific nutrient high in the food product. The health star rating, it gives a weightage to use of positive nutrients for protein, dietary fiber, and fruits and vegetables and other things to increase the star rating, assuming that such nutrients might negate the health risk attached to it. Whereas the warning label, it does not give weightage to positive nutrients, is based only on the nutrient of concern, like sugar, salt, and fat. For health star rating, it can be manipulated by adding positive nutrients to get a better star rating, while warning labels cannot be manipulated, they're direct. For health star, it signals the healthfulness, and it does not identify the unhealthy foods which are high in sugar, say for example, high sugar for diabetes or high salt for hypertensive person. And in warning labels, it signals the health risk as used in cigarettes, and it facilitates quick identification of unhealthy food products which are high in sugar, salt, and it benefits the people. For HealthStar, it may not decrease the consumption of unhealthy foods. While warning label, they've shown to decrease the consumption, taking example from Chile and Mexico. For HealthStar rating, the industry prefers HealthStar rating as it has minimal effect on their market, while the warning labels are not very much liked by the industry because it may have an effect on their business inversely. And coming to the end, it allows the HealthStar rating allows industry to make health claims and use it as a marketing tool, while warning label doesn't allow that scope at all. HealthStar rating is used in Australia and New Zealand, while warning label is used by a lot of countries, as Neha shared, in a lot of Latin American countries and in Israel. I want to give one example to you. This is a picture which we have taken from media report from Sydney Morning Herald from 2018. And in this particular news report, Nestle was accused of manipulating the Health Star system, where they were getting more stars by counting the nutrition of the milk that adds on with Milo. So they were not getting the stars based on what Milo has as nutrients, but it was adding up those stars with the nutrition of the milk as well. And they were accused of it, and they were stripped down of those 4 stars that they got. So here we can see how potentially Health Star rating could manipulate their star rating based on positive nutrients. So I'll stop sharing this, and I would request you to participate in a poll that we're doing. First is I would request you to endorse our policy brief if you wish to, if you like it, and if you are interested in this work, in taking this work ahead. And second is about what kind of warning label would you prefer? What kind of front of back labeling would you prefer for India? Thanks, Yashika, for sharing it. I would request everyone to please conduct the poll.
And those who wanted to do it later, for example, the policy brief, we have shared it electronically, but we'll share a link. Do we have a link?
You can share.
Okay. So later on we can.
Yeah, we did. Yashika is sharing it in the chat box. You can endorse it later also.
Yeah. By evening.
You can, if you want to.
Today.
Yeah, today. So we'll wait for a couple of minutes to finish this poll, and then we can have the results also.
Yeah, I think it should be over now, I think. Yeah. Nupur, can you, or Yashika, can you?
Hello?
Can you share the results? So I think it should be over, like it required a minute only.
We'll wait for 30 more seconds. So we have around 90 attendees and around 45 people have participated. I believe that some of them must be still doing it.
Okay.
So we will switch it off on 5:15. Yep. Okay, we have ended it. Yashika, if you could please share the results. Okay, so here we can see the results. So all the participants who have participated in the poll, they endorse the policy brief. Thank you very much. And for the second question, what do you prefer as the front of pack labeling for India? 87% participant believe warning labels and 13% believe health star rating.
All right.
Thank you, Yashika. You can take it down. Over to you, sir.
Okay. All right. Those who really want to read, and maybe they can. We have shared a Google link in the chat box, so you can go there, and if you wanted to take a look and endorse the policy brief later in the evening, we would welcome that. Now I would like to move on to. We are running about 15 minutes late. Apologies for that, but I'm moving on to the consumer organizations. First is George for your comments in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Gupta. I will make my comments at the same time. Some of us are actively involved with the food regulator in various capacities and being part of the stakeholder group on FOPL. I would like to put certain points in the right perspective. No final decision is taken about going ahead with the HSR. Only the business school survey was presented in the stakeholder meeting, and that required a lot of process. This need to be referred to the scientific panel, then it has to be reported in the food authority, then again a draft need to be notified 30 days time for the public to comment, again going back to the scientific panel. So it is a big process of about 1 year, so we have a lot of time. So no final decision is taken with regard. But the discussion was leaked out to the media as if India had already decided on the HSR. That is not giving the correct perspective. Number two is, which was not discussed, also is given a 5-year voluntary period. So the implementation of the FOPL will start only from the mid of 2027. That is quite surprising. None of the other countries had given. And even this voluntary period will start only from the mid of 2023. Even the countries which had made it mandatory, it was a staggered implementation. First year you reduce 25%, second year 50%, like that. So it is quite surprising. That also we need to take into consideration. Third thing is with regard to the thresholds and the categories, no decision or consensus, because we were having the time and all of us had given the comments up to 2nd of March, which has to, again, that has to go to the scientific panel or the working group on thresholds and take a final decision on that. So still we are in the process of that, but already the impression is created with the media report that India had already decided that we'll go ahead with the HSR and a voluntary implementation, which is not correct. So I thought of bringing this to the notice. So mainly the consumer preferences for the warning label. As all of us know, the purpose of the warning label is from a public health perspective to warn the consumers and help the consumers to assert their right to choice, to identify the unhealthy products, products with unhealthy ingredients like sugar, salt, and fat. So being that the main purpose of the FOPL, we are completely ruling out. I'm not going HSR. I'm not going into the details because as it is already presented, even a unhealthy product with unhealthy product can get a 5-star by adding healthy ingredients like protein, fiber, or vitamins. Already Professor Mark had mentioned about the Nutri-Boost and things like that. That is number one. Second thing is, the argument by the regulator is, people in India are familiar with the star rating because already in the energy star rating and all we have, the people are familiar. But if you look at that, 2009, the BE star rating was introduced, and 2021 survey shows that even 25% of the people in the country are not familiar with the energy star rating in the country. So that argument also can't help going ahead with the HSR. I'm not going into the details of that. Why warning label? as all of us know, it's a cost-effective strategy to guide the consumers to make the healthier choices. And warning labels are effective in attracting the consumers' attention. Like it was mentioned, in a country like India, with still the total literacy is only 77%, and the language is another barrier. We have 22 official languages in the same state itself, in a different dialects and all. We cannot go. So there has to be a symbol or a color, which can attract the attention of the consumers. That is the thing. And various other studies also had mentioned Indian consumer is spending less than 10 seconds to choose a product. And about 59% of them had mentioned they have difficulty in understanding the back of the pack labeling. So from the health perspective, if somebody wants to make a choice, they should be helped, with the product on the rack itself with a color or a symbol or things like that. And why warning label? From all over the world, we have several studies. I have 8 or 10 studies to show that. I will just mention one by the University of North Carolina in US under their Global Food Research Program, which was published in September 2020. A meta-analysis of 14 experimental studies that scrutinized existing FOPLs in force found that only warning labels significantly reduced the sodium content of purchases, but no effect of purchases were found for health star rating, Nutri-Score, or GDA labels. Several such studies are there. From Chile, we have already Professor Sila had mentioned why going for the warning label. Chile, after the implementation in 2016, the evidence showed that within the second year, there was 24% drop in sugary drink purchases in 2017 itself. Now the Chilean consumer can easily identify this warning label, resulted in companies reformulated product to improve their health profile and avoid the FOPL warning label requirement. So we have the evidence from Chile. And few other things to conclude with it.
Please be brief.
And the industry endorsed voluntary FOPL labels are not effective. And many evidence show that FOPL level system must be mandatory for all companies and apply to all products and types. Evidence indicate that applying a label to only some products can lead to misleading perceptions of the health fullness. Endorsement of FOPL label by the government or a scientific organization increase credibility. Criteria for the label should be made public in advance to educate the consumers and manufacturers and to encourage product reformulation. So these are the few things from the consumer perspective I want to present. I conclude here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Many thanks, George, for this. I want to add to what you have said, that it's not something which is done, but the minutes of the meeting at the FSSAI held notes it as a decision. It is noted as a decision to put it into the draft regulation. What gets into the draft regulation, it's not very easy people to fight out to remove that decision. So now I invite Mr. Hashim Sanyal, CEO of the Consumer Voice, for his brief comments.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta, and thank BPNI for inviting me. In fact, being a part of this FOPL committee, and besides, of course, being member of CAC, I've seen manipulative ways, and I'm being very blunt about it, about going forward with processes and techniques in terms of what the industry wants and what the regulatory finally falls for. This is one case where it went topsy-turvy midway, in fact, when the regulator was pressurized by the industry to actually go in for a kind of a system which is acceptable to them, rather than going for the benefit of the consumers. Now, as a civil society person, in fact, I know for once when we started discussing about FOPL 7 years back, it was basically to see the reduction of NCDs via the reduction of salt, sugar, and saturated fat, at that point of time, trans fat also. So this was the objective, in fact, of introducing FOPL as industry argument, that already all the information does exist at the back of the pack. So as a consumer organization, argument was that is for regulation purposes, front of pack is one glance recognition by the consumer or by the children or by anybody buying any product to say that this has got excess, and I use the word excess of salt, sugar, and sodium or saturated fat. Now that one glance look can only come with the warning label, and I'm making my argument very simple. It can only come by the warning label because of simple reason that the warning label indicates a specific area in the front of the pack label yet to be determined in terms of size or specifications. That the consumer will look forward to in case the person is allergic or basically has obesity or hypertension or cardiovascular problems. So that particular product is not suited for him. However, there is no ban for the consumer to actually not to buy it. And what the messaging that the consumer organizations will be giving at that given point of time whenever it is introduced is that you have it in moderation or you have it occasionally, these particular products, and they are there in the market and they're there to stay for good. I would basically indicate that the policy right now is flawed because of simple reason that the pillar which gives the strength to any FOPL regulation is the Hsr. Is the FOPL based on NPM or nutritional profile model. The threshold model right now is in a very, very haphazard way in the hands of few so-called specialists in the working group of FSSAI who are taking decisions without giving any kind of reasoning for the decision. We have in the committee meeting repeatedly pointed out what is the reasoning for coming out with such high threshold limits, in fact, which makes the industry smile and the consumer organizations cry. And no logic has been given. If there is a logic paper, we would like to demand for it. We have already sent an RTI for sending us the logic paper behind the working groups working. Just because they're scientists, just because they come from medical fraternity doesn't prove anything about their mandate about giving high threshold level. The second aspect of it is the voluntary versus mandatory, and I'm being very quick here. There was no mandate right from the first meeting to the 9th meeting, in fact, that the working group is working on defining the voluntary period or the mandatory period. Its work was only to define the threshold levels. So this mandatory versus voluntary came up at the last meeting to everybody's surprise. And this is something that needs to be addressed specifically because India has already laid by 8 years, in fact, in terms of its implementation, and giving further voluntary period would definitely, increase the burden of NCDs further. The last point that I want to make in the given timeline is that if we are to curb in a country like India, the NCDs and therefore basically reduce our consumption of salt, sugar, or saturated fats, it is important to use symbols. Now, symbolic structures have existed in India, and it is the symbol structure which is now used as a positive argument by the authority that the stars are symbol, in fact, but conveniently forgetting that the stars also have numbers. The stars also needs a particular understanding of what is this high on. That need requires a little reading. Our consumers in India who are not very literate, and specifically in terms of label reading, will definitely not come to any conclusions in the given 10 seconds of their buying a product, of having a kind of an emblem which they're not familiar with, whether it's star or any other emblem. A warning is something that would be marked as a warning, in fact, and I'm open personally to any color, in fact, whether it's an Israeli red color or a black color, that doesn't really matter as long as there is a single warning or there's a triple warning on the front of the pack, which is very important for consumers to make a quick choice about unhealthy products. So what we are trying to address is the nutrients of concern, and what we are ending up is basically promoting nutrients of concern by Hsr. So we must kill it right away in terms of our advocacy with the whole regulatory mechanism. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Ashik, for your comments on the regulatory process as well as the hidden problems within the development of this label, nobody could agree more. And of course, as you said, Bill Jeffrey in the participants also has suggested that India could have its own model. But I think the concept is warning here. The warning versus giving stars. That's a major concept of today's webinar, that which side we are heading to. So then the design and other things can be suggested, one can take on, but there are good examples existing in the world which has been tested and tried for this purpose. And the public health thing must be kept in mind. So I invite Amit from Center for Science and Environment for his quick comments, and then we will go on to the summing up and comments by the chairs.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta. 5 minutes, too late in the day. Quite difficult, quite easy. I'll try my best. Just to very quickly say that this entire journey of 10 years, I have witnessed it from very close quarters. I have been part of almost every discussion. Sitting in a situation where only about 10% of the committee folks were either civil society or, let's say, people who had their heart at the right place. And most of it is about industry. So clearly, this is something which is disheartening, the way we are, the direction in which it's going, because we essentially are, and it is quite clear to me that it is in a very orchestrated way going towards the HSR with relaxed thresholds and too much of a extended time frame, and that too voluntarily. So the entire mix is an ideal mix. Set script is ready for a very bad scenario. So I would just like to say very quickly that this entire journey is in 3 phases, if I can say so. One, from 2013 in a committee to 2019, when the FSSAI came up with their second draft. And then immediately after that, we tested for salt, sugar, and fat, and then we basically came out with the results. Essentially, almost all what is available popularly was to be read. So FSSAI delinked it, set up another committee to revise thresholds, and again opened up everything, despite the fact that 2 scientific panels, 2 drafts by FSSAI had actually come up with at least good thresholds, if not the format. So that was from 2020, it starts phase 2 up till the time when the study was given to IMA, and all that is the delays and dilutions we covered in our cover story in Down to Earth. And now it starts phase 3. Now this phase 3, I can tell you the degree of delays and dilutions is no less, as far as I see it. In fact, it is something which is instead, we are actually now in a danger of moving backwards in the policy with proposed HSR by actually giving food industry a system that effectively allows it to continue selling extremely unhealthy food and mislead the consumers as perhaps healthy food. So that's the paradox. That's the irony of the situation. So I would just like to say that we keep on talking about junk food. But just to let you know, the industry did not let it place in the first regulation as junk food, and they said HFSS. We all know HFSS is just half the story. I would even argue to say that the kind of food that Indians are eating at our home using our ingredients in the kitchen, is this actually a food? It is actually a factory-made concoction or a factory-made product. Now, keeping that in mind, it's very important that now we understand the HSR. That's phase 3 I'm talking about. HSR, we all know, people have talked about it, but very quickly, it can mislead because of design, algorithm, and inclusion of positive nutrients. Now, design, we know, stars as a positive connotation in India. That's a problem. The word health on the most unhealthy food, on the bad food, which is globally indicated for a bad health, is again is antithesis to the situation. And then, of course, 1 star, it's like less healthy food does not become healthier. The food with 2 stars, 3 stars might as well be unhealthy than what otherwise one would have eaten at our homes, or maybe a cooked meal. So this is a very carefully crafted strategy to play with the consumer psyche, and this strategy is crafted by a powerful industry. And I hope we had a strong regulator, so it was not there. But unfortunately, we are there now. And let's see. And I'm very pleased to actually acknowledge that we were talking about this, that we need support of medical fraternity. And I'm very pleased to note today and for the last couple of months that the medical fraternity of this country is now joining this momentum. And this fight is against a very, very powerful industry. And therefore we need to be together, and we need to be scientific. We need to be based this on common sense, intuition, and have our heart at the right place, because this is a no-brainer. Everybody today have talked about, we all know it's a no-brainer that if you are comparing in a study stars with a warning label, you actually need to warn people. Imagine, this basically tells you why we have on our cigarettes cancer affected lungs and not stars. If one can answer that, then of course we would understand what we are talking about. And this is the same nicotine which is addictive, and this is the same salt, sugar, which we know that it is addictive. Both are indicted for bad health. But on one hand, we are talking about cancer-affected lungs, and the other hand, we are talking about stars. So see the paradox, see the antithesis. So this is the irony of the situation. The algorithm, we know it's bad. It's at the back end. It's complex. It doesn't tell a diabetic or a hypertensive. It doesn't tell if I'm a hypertensive, I do not get to know whether this product has a good salt, a high level of salt or low salt. So this entire business of summary indicator, this narrative of overall health, is actually something which is not required. We don't need this. We just need nutrient-specific information, because that is critical to NCDs. The overall healthiness of anyways unhealthy product is not going to help us. So that's why I'm saying you can see the angst in me, because I've been there for 10 years. And it's very disheartening and painful. And as I said, I'm pleased that you guys are joining it. And this is the support that we now need. So coming to the larger issues now. You want to add positive nutrients, but can a junk food, no matter how much fiber you add, will become a good food? It will still remain a bad food. No matter how much fiber you add, the salt content in a particular food will still have same salt content. It might as well increase by what you have added. So this is going bizarre. This argument of overall health, overall positive nutrients. So this is really very strange when we try and argue, and we really see very strange arguments. So now what should we do? Now I have a feeling that there was a time when in our committee in 2014, we said, let's adopt traffic light labeling, because that was the best practice at that time. Therefore, today, I think we should go for a symbol-based label. It could be based on Colombia, it could be based on Israel, it could be based on our own, because we know our literacy barriers, we know our language barriers. And most importantly, who else than FSSAI knows the benefit of green dot in a square for veg symbol? That successful story, can't that be replicated? Do we not know that we are doing a tick mark for Jaivik food? Do we not know that we are doing just an F for fortification food? Why here we want to do stars? Now stars, they are saying it's symbol, but they are forgetting that it is based on a wrong logic. It is misleading. So these are some points that needs to be taken care of. Now, so let's say, what happens if we allow this to happen? Clearly, it does more harm than good. It doesn't really stands at a neutral scenario. It really does more harm than good, because the long-term awareness. One, of course, people will consume this, but people will not get to know, for their entire food habits will never get to know that salt is bad, and this goes beyond the packaged food. I also need to understand whether salt, whether sugar, what this does to my body, and this was an opportunity for us. We are actually losing on an opportunity to just creating a summary indicator and shying away from telling them people that salt and sugar are not needed. You don't really need to consume that in excess amount. So that's the kind of false narrative that's been drawn, and we have to be mindful. And if this continues and this happens, they are actually going to legalize and legitimize bad food to be sold as good food. And therefore, if we are serious, we really have to apply common sense. Yes, I'm just wrapping it up. We just have to apply our common sense, the entire concoction of voluntary, relaxed thresholds, and then this with kind of very misleading labeling system is going to be a disaster. And I'm using it very mindfully. It's going to be a disaster for the Indian NCD scenario. So with that, I can just tell you, I conclude, I submit. There's no more points. There's a lot that I can tell you, but I could have shared, but time is limited. I just want to say that let common sense prevail. Let consumer be the center of this decision making. Let consumer be the center of regulation. We don't need a situation where we are selling bad food as good food. We really need a strong action by a strong regulator, which is not influenced entirely by the food industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Amit. We promise that we will work together, and of course, everybody has to join hands, whether it is medical or non-medical community. But whatever we can together do, I think we should be doing. May I now invite Ashwini ji, because he has to leave early. He has another meeting at 6 o'clock. Before I invite Professor Sachdev to give comments, and then I'll invite Sachdev for summing up, and finally, Vandana, yeah.
Yeah, I managed to come home and I'm connected.
Right. So in the end, I think you will have the final comments to make as a chair. So, Ashwini ji, over to you now for your comments before you leave, and then I'll ask Professor Sachdev to speak. Yeah. Unmute Ashwini ji.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. In fact, I'm so very happy to be in the company of so many experts and expert come activists for healthy food. In fact, as you already know, that we have been fighting against the misdeeds of FSSAI on different occasions. And there has always been a kind of pressure from the industry to affect the policies of the government. Our sometime back, RUTF, the company, the industry made food for severely malnourished children. We fought against it, and ultimately we got the decision made against the RUTF. You were together with us on that, Dr. Gupta. And recently, again, when FSSAI has been trying to bring in GM food without there being their jurisdiction on the issue, we again fought against it, and I'm hopeful that the government will stop them taking that decision. Now, the issue today, I'm so very thankful to the BPNI and for having raised this issue, and other experts, those who have contributed to this. In fact, our country is of, traditional food, and we love traditional food, and that is actually the food. I'm with the Professor Mark Lawrence, who said that it's actually the food and not nutrients. In fact, this has to be kept in mind. I'm very clear about it that the present this present so-called decisions, though George was not accepting it, that no decision has been taken, but if you read, it is written decisions. So they have deliberately done it, because they can always show that this has been done in a meeting. And who consisted of that meeting? all industry people, hardly any consumer representatives, and those who said that this is not a correct way. They said, oh, 20,000 people have already given consent to this in IIM study. So Vandana ji, you take the challenge and make a study of 2 lakh people who would say that we don't like this idea of health star rating. And actually the warnings are required because today we are suffering. Most of our, a big percentage of our population is already hypersensitive, are already suffering from the problem of diabetes or blood pressure and so on. So we need healthy food and not the high salt, high sugar, and high saturated fat food. We need to keep that away from, and at least people should know that what kind of food we are really eating. So I find completely in this whole design, and in fact I agree with with Amit for raising this issue of a design of the corporates hand in gloves with FSSAI to have come out with such a so-called decision. And if it is a decision, it has to be reverted. If it is a discussion, it has to be stopped. And we have to go for the healthy food. So now what is required, whether it should be HSR or it should be warning labels, I think very clearly it has to be warning labels. And in fact, in the last, I would say that the issue of job losses came. I think we must stop those factories, those who are making this unhealthy food of high sugar content, high salt content, high saturated fat content, and we will not be losing jobs in any way because they are all automated factories. But yes, if we promote our healthy food, which is low in sugar, low salt, and which is more nutritious, which is more healthy, that would be made by our small food processors, and we will be creating more and more jobs, and that will gel well with our respected prime ministers' Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat, rather than getting imported food with this health star ratings. We should rather make use of the warnings, and these warnings will keep them away and bring our small traditional food processors get more jobs, get more business, and India move towards the Atmanirbhar Bharat. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwini ji, for your closing comments, which are meaningful and they are helpful in terms of joining the forces in the country, given the political nature of your organization as well as the cultural nature of the organization you are leading. So we would certainly need your further help to reach out to the Prime Minister and other people. Most of the decisions are made there. So we need to really get the FSSAI out of this. So thanks a lot for coming and sparing your time to be with us. And we will be in touch with you when we develop the communications so that we can together do something.
I'll be with you for 5 minutes. Huh?
Okay. Right then, Professor Sachdev, you have next few minutes for summing up. And then
what is few?
up to 10.
Okay, I'll try to be brief. Arun, maybe try to finish earlier. Please pardon me if I add a few things than what actually did not transpire, because they have been said indirectly in many references and even in this chat box. I think the first question that arises for us all is, with all these global hunger indexes and all going on there, and the industry also uses it, and many counter the arguments say, well, India is a country which is undernourished. Look at the children, and why do we need to focus on overnutrition right now? To them, my simple answer is a very comprehensive national nutrition survey done a couple of years ago. We have published on that, and you will be surprised, and many may be shocked to know that in 5 to 19 years old children, including those who are thin or short and usually conventionally classified as undernourished, more than half, 50 to 56% of them have evidence of metabolic obesity, that is dysglycemia or dyslipidemia. So this is an epidemic which is shooting up like anything. I have been talking about this for nearly 2 decades now with what not action. But the main point, apart from convincing people to act on this, comes is that we need to influence the diet of our children as well. While whatever exercise or this research has been done by FSSAI has simply focused on adults, and 2/3 of them are well educated. So keep the findings in that perspective. Maybe Mr. George thinks I'm wrong. Could you elaborate whether the research included children as young as 5 to 10 years old or 10 to 19 years old? I don't think so.
It includes rural and urban and women and men, but not children.
Exactly,
if I remember
that's
correct.
the point, sir, that I'm trying to make. It is the children we need to start influencing right in the beginning, and it should be 2/3 of them should be the illiterate population. It's the other way around. We don't want to strike at anybody's belly or whatever you want to call it. It would be best if one has a middle path with the industry. But if the scenario is such that no middle path can be taken, then I think lives should take precedence over the jobs, even if they are impacted, which data shows that they may or may not be impacted. Now, the third point I want to make is to address this epidemic. Please remember that diet is only one component of the entire story of this overnutrition which is occurring, and amongst the diet, front of the pack warning labels is just one part of the story. We want to, the whole idea is to influence the people to consume better food or better diets, and that can be achieved in a piecemeal manner. Why are we talking of these 3 nutrients? Because the science behind that, or the guidelines given by WHO guideline group, of which Mark and I were both members and are members still, it is important to have us to start functioning on those on which guidelines based on a rigorous review of evidence has been presented, and it's there. There's a whole ton of evidence right now emerged on the ultra-processed foods, yet the WHO has not issued a statement on that. So what to talk about the positive nutrients, what is considered as positive, we don't really know how it works and what works in the positive manner it is. And the third aspect, it is that beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder, and things change in different varying contexts. What works in Australia and New Zealand may not work here. What works in Chile or here may not work here. Now, I am really not sure in what manner the questions of this IIM study, the rigorous one, as it is said, is the idea to ask about the perceptions of the people, or actually to see in a store that they are giving what influencing them to buy. And from a reading of the report, what I could gather is both the warning labels and the health star rating scored equally, and the illiterate, rather the warning labels were more consistent and the illiterates were more interested in those warning labels. So I really don't know. And it's a decision, a draft decision, which has been communicated and minuted. And I'm aware of the process, having been associated with FSSAI in several panels and committees, of its going up to the top and then coming back again. But generally, it's the same sort of thing. So it really foxes me when children have not been considered and they are more likely to be receptive to the warning labels. Why the HSR was preferred one over the other when they were in equipoise? Shouldn't the stakeholders have been conducted, or at least a pilot trial run be conducted in different geographical regions to see in practice what works? The Make in India comment which Bill has been making, we do actually need to evaluate that. But from whatever the various speakers before me have spoken about, it is clear that health star rating can have unintended consequences. And really, it's only the warning labels which are showing an influence in the consumer behavior or experience, and taken in 10 seconds. And I really liked what was shown in the Chilean experience of the children actually telling the parents not to buy it. So that is where we need to go. And at least I'm convinced in my mind, if we have to choose between the two, it's really the warning labels, easily seen, colors and all can be worked up. There are several marketing experts, but at least that should be tried. And we do need to work on these things in the rural and the underprivileged area rather than the upper one, because it's a illiterate who have to be protected more from this rather than the other ones. So that, and actually, as it was seen, an overwhelming majority supported the warning labels. Now, the very fact that warning labels, subjectively speaking, are likely to work better is the mere fact that the industry is opposing it vehemently. I don't think we need anything more than that to be seen as that, or really go about doing any research on that.
Exactly.
Finally, I would just like to say that activism is good, writing letters is good, and everything is good. But what worked in Chile was a law regarding this. Maybe you can say the regulator is a law. We would need to think, or there has to be action on that in which all these stakeholders are involved. So thank you, Arun. I think I would like to stop here.
Thanks.
And I hope I have come in time.
Thank you very much. And you did well to sum it up, and also raise the last point, which is having a legal framework rather than just only relying on FSSAI. I think that's a point that we need to, as a group, need to work together on this. Finally, I just like to invite Dr. Vandana Shiva, who is a crusader and globally known for her work on the eating healthy and normal food, and she has been labeled as in the Forbes magazine. She was labeled as one of the top 7 most powerful women on the globe for her views, which she conveys so openly and forcefully. So your wisdom matters. And over to you, Vandana.
Thank you very much, Arun. And thank you to BPNI for organizing this very timely, very professional webinar. I tried to join, but I was on the road for 2.5 hours. I'm glad I heard the first bit, and I was able to catch up with the last bit. First, I think we do need to recognize the context of this new agency called FSSAI, which I do not see as a regulatory agency. It's a deregulation agency. It was put in place to deregulate every law we had to ensure Indians ate safe, healthy food. More importantly, because we got independence from a British empire that had left us in ruins, in famines, with livelihoods destroyed, we put food and livelihoods at the center of our policies. So we did not adopt industrial processing in this country by choice. We kept food processing in the small scale sector, as Ashwini mentioned, and therefore it was artisanal. And because we knew every ingredient that went in, it was all done in front of our eyes. It was all shared and communicated locally. It was prevention of adulteration that was the heart of the matter, and therefore we had a PFA. And then we had other laws, but the other laws were defeated in one fell swoop by the creation of SSAI, the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act, the Food Products Act, the Military Product, Milk Product Act, the Meat Food Products Order, the Vegetable Order, the Edible Oil Packaging Order, the Solvent Extraction Order, the Infant Milk Substitute. Again, BPNI and others fought hard to ensure that that would not be dismantled. And we need to do that again for all our food. You know, we are all being treated like vulnerable children now. And what we did with the infant food laws is what we have to do with bring back every law, because this was deregulation. There were 3 laws, 3 treaties put into the WTO, in the GATT, all about food. Dumping agriculture agreement written by Cargill. Ownership of seed, this is what I fought and through Navdanya. And we've refused to allow that to happen in India and many countries, including Chile, the TRIPS agreement. And the third is the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement. From 95, they were trying. It took till 2006. And when the parliamentarians were meeting, they asked me to do a quick note. And I wrote a piece at that time for the Food Safety Act. I called it food fascism. Why did I call it food fascism? Because it was forcing unhealthy food by all kinds of tricks, but making healthy food, local artisanal food, illegal. Asking women to measure how much oil and salt they put in their pickle. We have watched all the women's processing disappear. We have watched by law, Gandhi's Ghani shut down and we had to do a satyagraha. 5 million Ghanis were shut down in 1998 when the dumping of junk food and edible oils started. Just in this last few months, look at what the FSSAI has done. We have worked on building the organic movement so that people have healthy food without pesticides. We managed to exempt the fact that small farmers sell directly to someone they know. It's Article 4 in the organic standards. What did FSSAI do while everyone was quiet during COVID? They put aggregators, the Amazons, the Walmarts, the Armanis, the Adanis, into an exemption of certification so they can grow chemical and put a label organic. That's why they need industry-driven labels. Look at the GMO. You know, they're trying to substitute the Environment Ministry, which through GAC regulates imports and exports. They want to substitute the Environment Ministry, the Health Ministry. They've just done another set of draft regulations on GMO ingredients. It's like they're in such a desperate rush. And of course, they have to be in a desperate rush because everyone is waking up to the fact that healthy eating is vital, particularly during COVID times, where the comorbidities were the reason people were dying. The virus wasn't killing people. The comorbidities were killing people. The data is there. 80% deaths. Now they are owning up all over the world. Comorbidities, exactly the kind of chronic diseases that an industrial, ultra-processed food system is leading to, as Dr. Sachdev pointed out, children suffering from metabolic diseases. Worse. And this is what I want to end with. Those who made trillions, I think it was 1.5 trillion additional for the tech giants during lockdown and during the COVID crisis. They've already decided their future is in food. Silicon Valley, that's the book I'm reading just now, how Silicon Valley wants to change what you eat. They want to reduce food to a raw material so you can't have food directly. So the category 1 of healthy eating killed. Second, these star ratings will be in their hands. And look at the propaganda they've done on fake meat, lab-made fish, everything made in the labs. And that needs a star rating. So it's not just about today. It's about how they're preparing for a tomorrow. And we need to prepare for our tomorrow. And the suggestions that Ashwini had, that Dr. Sachdev had, I would say just two things. I think it is time for us all to get together and do a nationwide referendum. What food does India want to eat for a healthy future? For our children, for our women, for the poor, and for everyone else. One, we need to take charge of defining the agenda. FSSAI must be seen as what it is, a deregulation body put in place by industry to make us a dump yard for junk food. The second thing we need to do is really, Arun, do that, and we are there for supporting you like we are there to support you today. Let's just put together all the bad decisions they've tried to make during this COVID crisis, under the radar. Put it all together, because if we fight them one deregulation to a deregulation, you know, they've got all the industry behind them. But if we put it all together, then we put all the movements together. And if you put together all the movements of the people who are fighting against GMOs, the people who are fighting against pesticides, the people who are fighting on the right to food, the women's right to health. My sister Meera has done such tremendous work on that. Put it all together. We are the majority. They're a bunch of poor mafia gang. We can defeat them as we did during our freedom movement. Let's do it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vanda, for inspiring, and is always we get more energies from you when you speak. And certainly the coming months and year are full of challenge, no doubt about that. But getting together and कहावत जो है 1 और 1 11 वो शायद सिद्ध होगी यहाँ पे, और we will certainly fight it out for the health of our people in India. Thank you so much for your final remarks. And Nupur, can you check if there are any questions there in the any questions you said?
No, there are no questions, and the questions were already addressed by the speakers. So if we do have a couple of minutes, we can ask people to raise their hands.
No, we are already
late. Because we're already ahead.
Yeah. We've been going late. But if in last 1 minute, if you want to type any questions for us, we can respond later also. That's not a problem, and the experts would be available. So I'll take this opportunity in the end finally to thank all the speakers, particularly the speakers from Australia and Chile, who have accepted this and shared the experience from there. Mark and Marcia, your presentations are wonderful. We hope you will allow us to, we are going to share the recording in which it goes, but if somebody needs your presentation, we will ask you to let us know whether it's okay with you to share your presentations. And same question goes to Vandana and Neha. We can share those presentations with the other people. To all the other speakers, Ashim, George, and I think the time has come, as in the end Vandana ji very clearly pointed out, that all the forces have to get together and rather mobilize more forces in this field and try to bring the FSSAI to, in a way, to teach a lesson to FSSAI in that sense. But we continue to fight both at both ends, and there are quite clear indications of scientific nature as well as experience, which gives us a view that we need to fight for warning labels in India, because India is such a large country. And if India sets the example of going the going the HSR way, it's going to create an example for other countries to adopt HSR, because we are such a large country and marketing will be at its peak. And we will certainly be losing out on the health in the coming years and decades. So with that, I think we can close the webinar with the bundle of thanks once again, personally as well as from BPNI and NAPI, to all the friends who have joined, both as speakers and participants. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. It was great.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all the speakers and
Thank you.
participants. We will share the recording soon.
Yes, we will share the recording with everyone and the participants. Those who could not join, they have requested, so we will share that. Yeah. All right.